So we're going to talk cold calling today. Specifically, what we're hoping that you walk away with is a cold call formula that you can use either as a BDR or BDR leader for your team to engage prospects, with questions, great openers, secure meetings, that sort of stuff. Or if you're an account executive, self-sourcing pipeline is obviously a really big focus for a lot of you right now. So we have two great guests. Megan is a sales development manager at ZoomInfo, and Allie is a sales manager at Vidyard. So we'll get kind of two different perspectives here, one an SDR leader, one an AE leader. But Megan, Allie, you two ready to dig in?
Absolutely.
Cool. Megan let us know also she got pulled over right before this. Not to blow your spot up, Megan, but she did get a ticket.
Had to tell everyone. Had to tell everyone. No, we're here. We made it.
So for today, as we dig in, let us know. A lot of engagement in the chat, which is great. But if you have a specific question, the Q&A button there at the bottom of Zoom, make sure to throw your question into the Q&A section so that we don't miss it. We want this to be as interactive as possible. So one of the things I think that might be kind of fun to start out with is in the chat, let us know for cold calling specifically, what's the toughest part about cold calling for you? And it could be I get shut down in the opener. It could be I get a lot of objections. Yeah, let us know in the chat. What's the toughest part about the call for you? Yeah. A lot of stuff in here. Yeah, look at that. It's pretty crazy seeing all this stuff. Yeah, keep it coming. Hopefully this makes you feel less alone for you dropping stuff into the chat. It's tough for sure. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to break up today's call into three parts. So we're going to talk about the prep. So all of the stuff that happens before you make the calls. We're going to talk about the actual call itself, and then we're going to talk about the follow-up. So Megan, I want to kick this first question your way. In terms of like, if we think about the prep component in the choosing who to call, calling is one of those things it's a pretty time-intensive activity, and the pickup rates tend to be kind of low. So if we're wasting time calling people that we shouldn't, that's obviously a huge time waster. But when you think about segmentation, who to call, tech stack, triggers, all of that kind of stuff, how are you thinking about with your team about who we decide to pick up the phone and call?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, because if you can find some commonalities over time, depending on, who your team has reached out to in the past, or notoriously who's the best customer for you guys, and vice versa, who's least likely to answer, who's the least, best fit customer. I think figuring out those trends is super important. So say, for example, like you said, tech stack is something that's really big and important for us, making sure that, if you want to get over to someone, it's going to be a better conversation if they are using a technology that aligns with the service or solution that you're selling, something that correlates to, what you're going to talk about, or vice versa. Maybe they're using a technology that won't necessarily fit with what you're trying to sell them, or maybe seeing if that company's hiring. I think that's always a good thing to look at, going to that company's website, going to their careers page and seeing if they're hiring, right? I think hiring shows growth, and it's better to go after companies that are hiring rather than companies that aren't. And just trying to find as much information that you can to show that growth, I think, is super important. Going after companies that you haven't blown up so much over the last couple months, I really truly think that the best companies to go after are the ones that you're going to have conversations with, that aren't going to be like, yeah, your reps called me 2 weeks ago, or yeah, I just had a conversation a month ago. Trying to find those cold people that have had the least amount of interaction with as possible, I think, is also the best thing.
So if we were to come up with different kind of buckets of prioritization, it sounds like tech stack, and you're basing this off previous data, I'm assuming. So you're looking at the deals that we win, the meetings that we land. Are there commonalities in tech stack, triggers if they're hiring? Are there other buckets you might look at? Like, for example, prioritizing inbound leads, let's say, that came in that haven't been converted yet, things like that. Is there any other kind of buckets that you might look at?
Yeah, I think those are super important. I also think when you look at inbound leads that haven't been converted, you should look at how many times they have been called. Because even if you have a great fit title that's inbounded to you in the past, but they've already been called 50 times, I don't think it's the best use of time. But trying to find those people, if you can pull the data of sorting your prior inbound leads from least amount of calls to greatest amount of calls, I think going after those companies that haven't had as much interaction is great. Multi-threading through those is super great as well. If it's a great fit company that's inbounded in the past, but that point of contact that's inbounded hasn't responded to you, go after someone else. I think that's great, because if someone shows interest, but they don't pick up the phone for some reason, I think someone else will.
Okay. So I want to spend some time here because essentially the exercise that for everyone listening that you can do, even if you're a rep, let's say, and your leadership is not doing this, this is such a simple business concept. It's just reverse engineering success and applying the 80-20 rule. Like, what are we doing that's worked? And if we had to like really pick a pocket of things and like, double, triple, quadruple down on it, like what would guarantee more success? So triggers, we got segmentation ideas. I love the idea of, hey, let's treat this like an account. If someone from ABC company reached out, just because one person put their name on the contact form doesn't mean it wouldn't be a good idea to call other people. So Allie at Vidyard, how do you think about, because I think from an account executive lens, prioritization is even more important because you have less time. You might have an hour or two per day to prospect. How do you guys think about ICP and persona or triggers and like prioritizing the little time that an AE does have for outbound to make sure that, hey, we're at least calling on the right people?
Yeah, and that's a good question. I don't think there's like a foolproof answer, but what we're doing is working for us for the most part. But yeah, to your point, AEs don't have a lot of time. So ourselves as leaders, as management, we do our best to make sure we are surfacing the most engaged accounts, the accounts that are more likely to convert, whether like booking a meeting and obviously closing revenue as well. It's obviously like with BDRs, we want to book as many meetings as we can with account well, on both sides too. But on account executives are more so focused on, will this meeting actually, will I be able to call this organization after a meeting? I don't just want to book a meeting for the sake of booking a meeting. So it depends on what your tech stack may look like, but we use things like demand based to see certain like engagement levels on our web pages, on certain videos. Because we are a product growth led organization, it's no secret that Vidyard has a free tool. We'll look at those sorts of signals. So current free usage on an account level, on a decision maker level, and then thirdly on maybe a power user level. Maybe we want to try going bottom up in terms of even just getting our foot in the door, right? Especially with those larger accounts. So we'll go after number of high users or just power users there and look for those sorts of signals. And then I think Megan touched on this earlier, like looking at previous activity on that account as well. Like have we exhausted all of our options? Because there was a reason why an account executive chose to work this account in the past, but what were those reasons? Was there anything that they missed? And then not worst case scenario, sometimes straight cold can do the trick, but that's something reps should always fall back on as well. I think right now a lot of organizations are having to get scrappy and creative and find other ways to build their own lists as well. So something our team is doing is, if we sign on a customer, we'll just use ChatGPT to tell us top 10 customers that are in the same industry.
Yeah.
Go after those folks. Being more intentful with asking for referrals as well. In the past, when we would sign on a customer, it's like, oh, let me know if there's anyone in your network who would be interested in connecting, but actually having like a referral request process and cadence, whether that's phone, email, what have you. So we do our best to surface again the most engaged, the most fruitful for the team too.
I love that was one I was going to drop. This is literally after a prep call I did last week for another webinar. but we talked about the same stuff, lookalike customers.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a simple thing. It's like especially when a deal's been closed.
Yeah.
As soon as we close a deal, or we have a deal that's like really close to closing, saying, hey, can we find 5 or 10 other accounts that are literally the same exact company, but in a different industry, or sorry, same exact company in the same industry, so competitors, right? And being able to, I think one of the underrated things when you're doing outbound is the conviction. So if I'm an account executive and I, closed company A, and then companies B, C, and D are very similar, I'm going to be really pumped to call them because I'm literally talking through use cases that are almost identical, right? So commonalities there. Can you let us know in the chat too? Give us a yes in the chat. Does your company have a PLG style sales motion where a user of your product could just sign up for free on the website, let's say, or for very low cost? Let us know in the chat. I'm wondering how many of you have. There's a decent amount of you in that situation.
Yeah, there's more than I would think, which is good.
Justin says, hell no.
Hey.
One quick thing, Ali, just because this is going to be applicable for the PLG folks. Any tips on how to prioritize who you're going to go after if you see a company that has a lot of users, let's say? How do you guys think about who to go after and that sort of thing? And like, what's the approach?
Yeah, so if there's like high usage, and the tech that we use to identify that shows us the exact like department and positions those users are. So typically it's sales users that are using the free platform. Well, then we'll just go after the sales decision makers, director levels, VPs, maybe managers, depending on the size of the organization. So the number of folks. If there's only one person, and we'll might touch on this later, when you're tiering accounts, if there's like 1 or 2 people that are just like power users, but they're a huge company, I would label them like a tier C, and we're going to reach out to those power users to gather information, hopefully an intro to their leader, their manager, so you have actually relevant problems to speak to when you are connected with those folks. And then we also use other like engagement tools as well. So we have like a bunch of Salesforce reports, Salesforce dashboards. So there's Spicy, we call them marketing qualified accounts. So they have 3 power users. They also use an MAP we integrate with. Their decision maker also has a free Vidyard account. So those would be like a tier A, and then sort of waterfall from there. So maybe just free users, but they don't have an MAP that we integrate with, but still a fruitful account. And then tier C's are more so power users we'll reach out to.
Yeah. And I think to Larry's comment there in the chat, I think this bottom-up approach can be very powerful, especially when you're going to executives at large companies where you're coming in and having some insight, right? Something unique to share. Megan, if we were to kind of think about, so we've prioritized and thought about who we're going to reach out to. If we were to before we get into the actual call itself, the tactical kind of blocking and tackling of like how we execute this from a time management standpoint, how do you guys think about that at ZoomInfo? When do you make the calls? How long are the call blocks? Like, what do you cover in the call blocks? Like, I think all of that stuff it's a part of this that doesn't really get talked about as much. And this is almost as much a exercise in productivity as it is, your abilities on the phone.
Right. I feel like for every individual person, it is an exercise, because I have reps on my team, for example, that start their day immediately by calling low-hanging fruit, which means like, say, people over the last several weeks that have said, hey, give me a call back tomorrow, and they haven't heard back from them, or people who you've booked a meeting with that have canceled and you were trying to get a time back on the calendar. Basically having a list of 20 or so companies that you can call where if you were to just get them on the dang phone, that you would be able to book it, right? That's how I always did it as an SDR. I would start with the low-hanging fruit and I would do a call blitz first thing in the morning. I have other reps on my team who will start their day with sending LinkedIn messages. right? And they prefer to do that because it warms them up. They can, you know, get out of their brain fog in the morning and then have hopefully responses coming in, trickling in throughout the day. So that gives them another form of way that they can book a meeting, right? I think it just depends. And I feel like it's really important, as say for me as an SDR manager, to have people understand all the routes that they can book meetings, have an omni-channel approach. I think if someone is just doing calling or just doing LinkedIn, they're missing out on a huge opportunity. But incorporate all of those things into your day. Do a block for calling prior engagement conversations of people we've had opportunities with in the past. Do a block for cold calling new companies. Do a block for LinkedIn, a block for emailing, whatever that looks like. Do that for maybe a week and see what blocks produce the most for you and play around with the times of the day, right? I really don't believe it is a one size fits all for every rep who's conducting their, you know, their outreach. I think it depends on the person. But I think the thing to think about is if, say, LinkedIn is something that they learned from a team member that's working super well, and they're not getting their desired results from it, that it isn't a one size fits all. They need to figure out, maybe I need to spend the back half of the day on a Friday just doing LinkedIn in bulk, or maybe I need to do it in the afternoon on a Tuesday or Thursday or whatever that looks like. But I think it is customized depending on the rep and what really works for them. But having that omni-channel approach in different blocks of your day, I think is super important. I think having at least a minimum hour for a call block is what you need. I don't think you can accomplish a whole lot in 30 minutes. So before you pivot to something else, I think you should at least do it for an hour.
Got it. So I think a theme there is to have themes for your blocks. So in other words, the principle here is eliminate task switching. So if I'm picking up the phone and calling, and again, I think this is really underrated, allow yourself to get into a rhythm with doing the same type of activity for an hour and a half.
That flow state. Yep.
Yeah. And it also, do you go as far as, and I get that you guys sell sales tech, so it might not be quite like this, but even focusing across personas where, hey, for an hour, I might focus on my manufacturing persona, and then I might focus on my ops persona, and then I might like separate it that way. What are your thoughts on that?
I think there's different blocks in regards to, say, calling individuals and then calling companies, right? Because if you think about a task-based workflow where you have a bunch of tasks that are set up from individuals, like I talked about, maybe someone who opened your email. Of course, you want to go after that person, or someone who you had a brief conversation with that said, follow up with me in September. You're going to talk to that person. I think it's good to have that block for individuals you already have notes on. So that way you're not going to have to do research. I think leaving notes for yourself is so important, and people get lazy with it because they're like, yeah, I can just look up the information later, or I can go back in my call log and look at the last conversation I had. And it takes so much time. So if you can leave yourself adequate notes on those people for a call block, I think that's super important. And then I do think it is a mindset switch when you do a block focused on an account-based strategy, right? Say your call or your thing you're trying to accomplish within this hour call block is to call through 5 different accounts, right? And maybe it's 3 to 4 people per account. And I would recommend staying in a similar industry for that block. So say you're calling through logistics companies and you're calling through 3 to 4 people per company. You know the services they offer, you know what it is that they provide, you know what it is that you're going to solve, and then you can just duplicate that same thing across multiple accounts, multiple personas, and I think that's the easiest way, and that's what I teach my reps to do.
Got it. So I think the task-oriented piece is really important. It's almost thinking of it's leveraging a lot of like principles they use in manufacturing around task batching. Like doing similar types of things, separating like contact-based outreach versus account-based outreach. I think the leaving notes for yourself is like a little discipline thing that's like saving your future self time, where it's not the first time that you look at an account every time you look at the account, and you don't have to redo all of that stuff. So a typical SDR, would you say then, is how many hours would you say per day that they might spend like on the phone, or maybe throughout a typical week? Like what does the rough kind of breakdown? So for those of people that are listening, they might be able to kind of customize this, but what does that typically look like?
I would say not necessarily a certain amount of time, but more a certain amount of dials. I would say like normally for folks at ZoomInfo, it's a minimum of 75 a day, which doesn't seem like a whole lot to some companies. I know some companies are making 200 dials a day, but we do really focus on that omni-channel approach. So that way we do focus on breaking into accounts on LinkedIn, because I saw in some of the comments there, the biggest thing is like getting people to pick up the dang phone. Right? Sometimes it's easier to have a LinkedIn message that you can reference back to saying, hey, Jason, it's Megan. Does my name ring a bell? You should have got a message from me. A lot of the times those things are so big, and it might be something that's very small, but I think peppering in different touch points so that way when you do make your calls, I would rather have 75 meaningful calls than 200 unmeaningful calls because they don't know who I am and I haven't given myself a way to warm up the call.
Got it. And a lot of you are asking in the chat, yes, this is recorded, and yes, we will send it out afterwards. So you'll definitely get a chance to re-listen to this if you want. Awesome, Megan. So Allie, from an account executive's perspective, and feel free to talk. I mean, you freaking crush it as an account executive. So feel free to talk on your, kind of personal experience as well as with your team. But the time management exercise is very different for an account executive in this area, because ideally they're spending a lot of time working deals. But how do you think about the outbound self-sourcing piece from a time management standpoint of like, how do you make sure that this actually gets done, and any time management productivity tips to make sure that the activities get done?
Yeah, everyone's always tricky to learn as an AE, and it took me a while as well. But what I found that worked best for me, and a lot of folks in the industry recommend this as well, is meaningful time blocking. So if you're going to do cold calling, if you're going to do your account research, have an end goal of that hour. Don't just put in your calendar cold calling for the hour, because that's so easy, and I'm still guilty of it, just moving it till tomorrow or till Friday and leaving everything that I have to do until one day, everything on Friday. And then what I'm doing is just going to be a waste, because Fridays might not be the best day for me to prospect, who really knows. So with this purposeful time blocking, so if you block out an hour for cold calling, have maybe, I don't know what's a realistic in terms of cold calling for folks, but one booked meeting within that hour, maybe like 30 dials and one booked meeting, or 40 dials, one booked meeting. Or you have your prospecting time blocks, one in the morning, one in the afternoon. So your achievable goal for the day are 40 dials in the morning, 40 in the afternoon, and then your outcome goals from those prospecting hours, maybe 2 booked meetings for the day. So just make sure you have numbers associated, like a goal associated with that time block, not just what you're going to do. Because again, I'm still guilty of moving things over and leaving things for future Allie to deal with. And then I hate myself later. So that's the best way, like that's the best piece of advice that I've ever received. And then same thing when it goes for your account research. So for us, we call them SALs, sales accepted leads. So for our team, the weekly goal, and this is like the bare minimum, is to work 60 new sales accepted leads for the week. That's only 12 a day. So like you should be able to work that backwards pretty well. And the goal is to book 3 meetings for the week. So that's like the bare minimum we hope for. And then of course I do recommend even having stretch goals for yourself within those time blocks too. So achievable goal, a realistic one, and then your stretch goal. But what you'd want to avoid as well is if you hit a goal or your stretch goal and you have time left, like you want to avoid saying, oh, I've achieved my goals. Like I can, I don't know, take a little nap and get to this later. Use the time you have left, because you're going to lose time somewhere else. So you might as well keep going until that time is over. And to Megan's point, you're in a flow, like keep working and keep hustling there, but just make sure everything you do is purposeful and you don't just blankly fill your calendar with busy work, for lack of a better term.
Yeah. And again, it's very like, it's a manufacturing principle, where it's like you're thinking of your time in terms of units. Like for an hour of time, I should make X amount of calls, and like literally putting that on your calendar, I think is huge. A lot of people are asking, let's get to the like actual call itself. So a lot of people are asking, especially about voicemails and that sort of stuff. So let's start with that. Megan, what are your thoughts on voicemails? Should you leave them? Should you not leave them? What should you say in them if you do decide to leave them?
Yeah, I think if you are to leave a voicemail, don't make it longer than 15, 30 seconds. I think if you decide to give your full pitch on your product within your voicemail, I think that is not a good use of your time. I do think they are really important for those people who you are trying to follow up with. There's a guy I follow called Jeremy Miner on a bunch of sales tactics, and he talks about using those voicemails and using opportunities to get people to answer that are almost your Hail Mary in your last point of reaching out, where you can say something like, "Hey, Jason, it's Megan with ZoomInfo. I've emailed you, I've sent you messages on LinkedIn, I've given you calls, and I haven't heard back from you. Just let me know where we should go from here." And it's almost like a pre-breakup message. And I love using that same messaging on LinkedIn and email as well, because hopefully you're just trying to get a response from this person where it's either an apology saying, "Hey, so sorry I didn't get back to you, just want to let you know that I'm living and breathing," or someone's going to tell you to go kick rocks. Sometimes I'd rather someone just respond to my voicemail and tell me to go kick rocks rather than me continue to call them for 2 weeks. Like, I think that's a win. If they can disqualify themselves, I think that's great. Or maybe it'll give them the opportunity to actually have a conversation with you, right? But I think using that as kind of a pre-breakup message over voicemail is important. They hear your voice. They kind of hear the persistence of, "Hey, tried to do this. I've tried to do this. I haven't heard back from you. Just let me know what you think I should do from here." And I think it's a good use of a voicemail.
So short, sweet, to the point, that sort of thing. Allie, what about you? Voicemails.
Yeah, I'm indifferent. I think if it works for you, you should do it. There's some like cheeky, some clever ideas that I've seen on LinkedIn, or people have even left me. Like one time I got a voicemail from I think a BDR, and she just said, "Hey Allie, it's Christine calling. Here's my phone number. If you could give me a call back." I was like, I had no idea where she was. At first I'm like, I don't know where you're calling from. But I'm almost like intrigued to call you back because I don't know where you're calling from. So I thought I didn't call back. That almost got me to call back. So I think there are creative ways you can go about leaving voicemails. And to Megan's point, just keep them short. I don't think they have a very high conversion rate, so I don't think you need to overthink it either. Keep it short and sweet. Move on to the next.
Yeah, the other thing I would add with voicemail is, I was just training a team on this right before this, is like a lower friction ask. So when you ask for a call back, I mean, think about, you two probably have pretty busy schedules. Like, I'm in meetings back to back the entire day. I don't have time to call someone back and then play phone tag with them. But if they said that they were going to send an email and it was about something that was relevant to me, I might go check that email.
Yeah.
So pointing the voicemail to an email can be pretty effective too. You know, "Hey, no need to call me back, Allie. I just sent you an email. Subject line is SDR ramp time. Looks like you guys are hiring a bunch of SDRs. I had a few ideas based on our work with ZoomInfo that we just did. Yeah. Again, no need for a call back. Subject line is XYZ." You know, that I've seen that be pretty effective as well. But
yeah,
one other thing that I would add is Orem did a study on 7.8 million cold calls. And what they looked at was the ones where the rep left a voicemail after the first call, the subsequent pickup rate was 25.8% higher. So in other words, the chances that a person picks up a future call from you are about 25% higher if you leave a voicemail at some point in your outreach. So just something to think about. Okay, let's get to the actual like call. Okay, there's lots of philosophies on the call. And if we kind of break it down, let's first talk about the intro. And I'll kick this one your way first, Allie. Intro. So when we're calling a prospect, what are your thoughts on what to do in that first 30 to 60 seconds?
What worked for me, and I used to work for a sales consultancy agency where we literally did outbound for ourselves, like cold calling, used auto dialers and did that service for others, is I would just say, "Hey, it's Allie calling from the sales developers. I was wondering if you could help me out or point me in the right direction." And then usually, like, people still tell you to buzz off no no matter what you say, you just gotta prepare for it. And then usually a guard is dropped, like people want to help people. So then that at least bought me 5 to 10 more seconds to actually get out the reason why I'm calling. Like, I'm not sure if this is a part of like your day-to-day responsibilities or important to you. Here at the sales developers at Vidyard, here's what we're helping with XYZ. Like, does this fall under what you're focused on for the next quarter, next fiscal year? And then they would tell me, actually, yes. And we'd have a great conversation and we'd book a meeting or go away or actually point me to the right direction there too.
Yes, I think asking for help, the tonality, I think, is super important too, where it's like,
yeah,
hey, I was hoping you might be able to help me out with something real quick.
Yeah.
And this is the part I feel like it's hard to teach tonality, but I'm curious, Megan, for your reps, let's do the same thing. Kind of like, what do you suggest for intros? And like, if you could speak on the tonality piece too, I think that'd be helpful for everyone.
Yeah, I am 100% with Ali on this. I think that's super important. When I'm training new SDRs, I think the biggest thing to think about with their tonality is to just talk like they normally talk. I know we talked about this last time, but when they move into a role where they're going to be calling people, especially an outbound role, people tend to put on this persona, this salesperson persona of, hey, Jason, it's Megan with ZoomInfo. How's your day going today? And no one wants to talk to that person, even if you are a naturally bubbly person, which is fine. But what I've always said is go cold call your mom, go cold call your significant other, go cold call your friend. And if they tell you, why do you sound like that? Or that sounds nothing like you, then you know it's probably something that you're trying a little bit too hard on. But I think that perspective of, hey, I just wanted to make sure I'm in the right spot, or hey, I wanted to see if you can help me with something, is perfect, because it's almost this mental shift where for 1 second they might think you're a possible customer, which I love. Because if you're like, hey, I wanted to get over to you, Jason, I had a quick question for you. I'm not sure if this applies to you or maybe someone else, but I wanted to make sure that you guys are offering XYZ solutions or something like that. Hey, I noticed that you're the VP of sales over there. I assume that you're overseeing XYZ. I could be completely wrong, but I just want to make sure I got over to the right spot. Right. So you almost sound like a customer in the very beginning, which allows them to drop their guard down, like Ali said, where they're not immediately being like, what does this person want? But they are kind of trying to bridge the gap of, can I help this person with something they need? Or is this going to be a waste of my time? I would rather have that than the immediate turn off. So also being able to say something in regards to, hey, Ali, I'm calling you because I know that you're the VP of sales over there. And I understand you probably overlook XYZ things. Do I have that right? Perfect. You want to get the yes. And then say the reason why I'm calling you specifically is because, and then go through the rest of your pitch. I like being able to say you specifically, because it's not like they're going to tell me, oh, I'm not the right person for that, because I've already confirmed what they do. I assume that you do XYZ. And if they tell me, well, actually, I do something a little bit different, but it still aligns with why I'm calling, and I do still think they're the persona that's going to receive what I have to say very well, I'll say, oh, okay, perfect. That still aligns with what I wanted to call about. Right. And then they're less likely to say, oh, I'm not the right person for that. I don't really oversee that, because I already confirmed that with them. So I think making it more about the person, less about your solution and their entire company, is super important.
So this is a whole big thing. I've interviewed multiple people at ZoomInfo about the yes thing. This is a very intentional thing, it sounds like, that you guys do. And I think there's some psychology behind yes, but there's also, if you look at the data on cold calling and the ratios of like talk time, one, it actually shows that the rep in successful cold calls talks more than the prospect, but the beginning of the call, there's a lot of back and forth. So you're getting a lot of like confirmation through there. So the yes, I wanted to ask something specifically around, hey, normally when I talk to VPs of sales, you're focused on, and you said ... Let's talk about the ... because what a lot of reps will do in that instance will be like, yeah, normally I talk to a VP of sales and you're focused on data hygiene and the numbers that your reps are calling and the cold emails that they're sending and if prospects are replying. And it's like, no, that's not what the VP of sales cares about. And it's also, people are really tempted to do a product pitch right there. Like normally when I talk to VP of sales, they're focused on like the software and like making sure that they have really good, ways to engage their prospect. And it's like people go right into pitch mode. Those two things are going to get you shut down usually very quickly. So what is the part that you are filling in there in terms of what you hear people like them focused on?
Yeah, I think if I can be a little bit more generic and like say I'm trying to get in touch with someone that oversees a sales team, right? So I can say like, hey, as the VP of sales over there, I understand that you probably oversee some type of sales team. Is that right? Or are you bringing in new business yourself? Right? Because depending on the size of the company, a VP of sales at a bigger company could oversee a whole team. A VP of sales at a smaller company could be the one source of sourcing everything. They are an AE, they're the closer, they're the rep, they are everyone. So if they say they oversee a sales team, I can say like, okay, perfect. I think this might be pretty relevant. I'm calling from a firm called ZoomInfo. Based on, my LinkedIn message I sent over or my email that I send over, do you have any knowledge of us outside of those things that I sent over? And if they say yes or no, depending on what that is, I'll say, okay, great. So my whole goal was to get 15 minutes in the calendar to talk to you about blank. I like the upfront contracting of saying, hey, my goal was to get some time in the calendar so that we can show you some companies that are searching for solutions you provide, right? Because we have an intent feature at ZoomInfo where we can show companies, every company that's searching for their solutions, right? So that's what I would do, is keep it very, very short and then follow it up with a question. So we could say, just to make sure this makes sense, I'm just curious though, with the reps that you do oversee, how are they bringing in new business? How are they prospecting? So I give a little bit of what it is that we want to show them, but I also kind of take it away for a second and say, but just to make sure that this would be a good use of time with the sales reps that you manage, how are they currently doing what they're doing? And then it turns more into a question answer type of conversation when they know a little bit about what I do versus me giving this whole minute long pitch of what I want to show them.
Yeah. Love that. So the approach there is make sure I'm talking to the right person. It aligns with your responsibilities. And then you're just going to go in and explain what you want from the person and then ask a few more questions. Love that. Another thing that, and this is what I teach, I call them priority drops, but you can do in that ... Hey, normally when I talk to VPs of sales, if you mention specific priorities or problems that these people typically have, that can work really well too. Where it's like, hey, normally when I talk to VPs of sales, they're focused on either, getting their AEs to self-source more pipeline, just because they have to rely less on marketing, SDRs, and need to increase pipeline coverage, or running tighter deal cycles. So they're having to do more multi-threading, speaking with more CFOs these days, and they want to make sure that they're threading those deals right. Does that sound like your world? Or how does that compare to what you're focused on? Right. And you can look for something that they're working on, especially if you see a lot of patterns in the people that you help. That could be a great way to align really quickly with something they care about. Allie, so this ask for help, once you get the person and they're like, I oversee sales. Where do you kind of take the call generally from there?
Back in my cold calling days, typically referencing information like Megan mentioned as well that I sent, probably a video if I'm going to do a Vidyard plug. Typically, yep. I sent you a Vidyard video the other days, as specifically reaching out to you because I see you're hiring more account executives, folks that we're bringing on. They are focused on generating either more pipeline, more self-source pipeline, and booking more meetings given the economic climate. More reps are having to focus on self-gen versus relying on marketing. Is this a similar realm that you're in? So basically there, Jason, what you just said is where I'd take it, and just collecting yeses. And then they'll tell me where they want the conversation to go. From there, if it's not them or not, if it's not them, if they don't oversee that department or those goals, they'll tell you. You don't always have to ask as well. Like they'll tell you if you're wasting your time or not.
Yeah. So very similar type of approach, it sounds like. And I think the big thing is if you really nail that language, you don't have to do so much customization. You don't have to do so much research if you really nail the language. So one thing that everyone watching this, what you could do is if you're an account executive, like think back on the last like dozen conversations that you've had with that prospect. And what did they tell you was the reason why they wanted to hop on the call? Like, what are their challenges? Like, find the patterns between them, and you'll find that 80-90% of the people you talk to, they're kind of working on the same stuff and they use very similar language. And if you're a BDR, listening to, if you're not being provided this, listening to recordings of your account executive speaking with the actual prospect, like you'll find a ton of similarities. Okay, let's talk about, okay, one thing that we didn't really get a chance to get into was like the time that you should spend calling people. Like, do you see, Megan, with your reps, do you see variances in pickup rates across your reps?
I think time of the day is really important when it
Yeah.
comes to that. The variance in pickup rate, I do think with, like say for example, I have reps that specifically like to target around the area that they're located because they will use like their cell phone and like their area code. So I have a guy that's in Texas that loves calling people in Texas and loves calling people in Florida because he says people in Florida love people in Texas, right? So he will utilize that to his advantage. Or I have people in California that will specifically call people in California and they find that they have higher pickup rates there. I do think it is very important that whatever dialer system that you use, like you are checking your number to make sure it is not showing up as spam, because I feel like that is becoming more and more of a thing as of late. But I think the time of the day and pickup rates is very important. I think when people start their day, say if you're on the West Coast and you're starting your day dialing at 7 a.m., you can call people on the East Coast, probably not call people on the West Coast at 7 a.m. But you have that block. I feel like it always slows down around the middle point of the day. And then I have a lot of people that are getting a lot of meetings around like 5 or 6, which is really interesting. And I think that not letting your foot off the gas too soon in your day is really important. I used to have that mentality of, well, it's later in the day and people are packing up and they won't want to have a conversation. So I'm just going to focus on quote unquote admin work or busy work. But we have so many reps that are booking people at, 5 o'clock, the prospect's time, where they are wrapping up. They're in a better mood. They're probably not in meetings anymore. And the quality of conversations is better. So I think first thing in the morning and end of day are probably your two key hotspots. But I think your connect rates also change compared to how many times the person has been called that you are calling, which is circling back to my point earlier of, are you spending time calling people that have been called 50 times? Or are you spending time calling people who haven't been called very many times? And I think your connect rate does increase when you think about those type of things.
Yeah. Like another thing I would add is Monday and Fridays, like are great days too. And we tend to not make calls that day because I don't know where this came from, but a lot of people are taught that, oh, prospects are busy on Mondays. They're just getting their week started. They're back to back with meetings. And on Fridays, people are worn out from the week and they're going to be really grumpy. And it's like, okay, I don't know where that came from.
I think they're in a better mood on Fridays. I feel like people are so much more likely to chat and see what's going on, like especially conversations that you are continuing to follow up with, say like someone you already have an opportunity with, where like the AEs that are trying to move someone through their pipeline. I think those are great times to have follow-up conversations because they already know who it is, they're in a better mood, and it's just easier to connect with people.
Yeah, and Matthew Harris dropped some good ideas there in the chat. Wanted to get a hold of you before the weekend. But that mid-afternoon Friday block is usually really good. So just use whatever tool you're using, should have some reporting if you're dialing through it around pickup rates. So if you're a sales leader, that would be a great report to pull for your team. When are pickup rates highest? Because there's been a lot of big studies on it. The macro studies are never really good. When they get down to specific personas, you'll find that the pickup rates vary widely across personas. Last tip I would give is calling, 5 to 10 minutes prior to the end of the hour or after, oftentimes you can catch people between meetings too, especially for those hard to reach prospects. Allie, since you guys have some unique things at Vidyard that you do around this, the follow-up. So once we land a meeting, I think one of the biggest things is, I'm curious what you two would consider a good show rate to a meeting too, but getting the person to show is really big, and then to have a good experience. But what's a target show rate that you guys would aim for that first meeting before we get into the follow-up?
I feel like ours is actually pretty high, and I don't know if that's just because the product, if people are just interested in learning about video or in Vidyard, especially if they're new to video. But ours is probably around, like in my segment, we sell to SMB is around 90. I think like industry standard is like 70. I think 70, 75 is good, but I could be wrong. That's pulling that out of the back brain. I don't know, Megan.
70 I would say 70% is normally like a really solid good fit show rate for all of us too.
Yeah.
So if you're not getting 7 or 8 out of every 10 people to show up, let's give them some ideas. So Allie, what's the process? We book a meeting. What's the process, even on that call still, if there is anything while we have the person, but what do we do between then and the time of the first meeting to get them to show up?
Yeah, on the call, typically just letting them, I'm going to send you a calendar invite for September 8th at 2 p.m. Just reconfirming that time still works for you. I like to reconfirm it because sometimes they'll just throw out a time just to throw out a time. I know there's different perspectives on that. I'm going to send you an email with everything that you can expect. So typically, whether if you're an SDR account executive, you should have some sort of template ready that you always send. Obviously we use a video as well. It can be generic, it can be personalized. Even when I was selling, I had a generic video like, hey, thanks for the time. Here's what we're going to go over in our meeting. Cell phone numbers in my signature if you have any questions. Furthermore, we have our team, and I did this as well, confirm the meeting the day before, because typically, even I do this as well. If I'm going to cancel plans, I usually cancel plans the day of. So you want to avoid that mindset with folks and get that confirmation the day before. Again, meeting confirmation email, very similar to the email that you would send after you just got off the phone. We include a video. It can be generic, it can be personalized. It depends on your style. But we just have a template ready and we send it. And therefore, as well, if you have software that tracks if they opened it, if they clicked it, or if they watched the video and they still no show, it's like, well, I know you got that information and you didn't even let me know why, like you couldn't attend. So like, they got that as well. So it's good to have that data on the back end. And yeah, that's typically the process for us there. And it seems to work, and we're lucky we get to drink our own champagne and use our tool to make sure folks show up. Yeah, it's something really little, but can be very effective as well. And I feel like a lot of account executives forget to, even my reps today, I'm like, well, did you confirm? Even if it's a decision call, it doesn't have to be a first demo. Every meeting you have in your calendar, you should be confirming. So write that down.
And confirmation is primarily through email, or will there be a text also?
Our team, we do email. If they haven't shown up within, I say like 7-ish minutes, we pick up the phone and give them a call. Typically there's running late from a meeting, or they just forgot, and we can reschedule it on there. And then if you have a good relationship, sometimes we'll send them a text as well.
Megan, what do you guys do?
Yeah, there's a couple things. I think this weird guilt comes in when you book the meeting, the prospect doesn't accept, and then you feel the need to give them a call to be like, hey, you haven't accepted. There's this weird guilt that comes in where you're like, well, now I don't want to bug them. And then now they won't want to go to my meeting even more. So like, I should just leave it be. And the thing is, they agreed to a time with you. You have the party on our end, which is now preparing for that call. And it's a respect thing. That's what we think, right? It's our calendar too. So I think the easiest way to get out of that guilt is by telling the prospect on the call, hey, if you could do me a huge favor, accept the calendar link when it gets over to you. So that way I know that our calendars align. If I don't see an accept from you within the next couple hours, just know you're going to be getting a call from me. If you don't want a call from me, then please accept it. Right? So that way you have set that upfront contract of, just so you know, this is going to happen. So that way you don't feel guilty about it, right? Or I think just getting them to accept while you're still on the phone is probably the best thing that you can do, right? And I know sometimes the speed of going through the logistics of booking the meeting takes a little while, but if you can get them to accept on the call, I think that's great. But I think the biggest thing with that is actually follow through with what you said you were going to do. And if you say, I'm going to call you in the next couple hours if I don't see an accept, actually call them, right? Like put a block in your calendar for going and confirming all the people that you've booked that day, right? Call them. And then I think if you're booking something over 4 days out, this is just us. If you're booking something over 4 days out, send some type of value add at the halfway point. I think like sending a vidyard is great. Or for us, like we'll send a screenshot of a customized search in the ZoomInfo platform saying, hey, we have 200 companies that have been searching for commercial solar solutions within the last month. Let me know if any of these stand out to you, or let me know if there's any specific companies you'd like us to pull up during the call, right? So it isn't even just a confirmation of saying, hey, hope we're still good for this time, but it shows we've been prepping, we've been thinking about you, we pulled up a search based on your specific company. Let me know if any of this stands out. And I do agree with Allie, call the day before. Don't wait until the day of. And I think texting is important. You can also set that expectation on the call too. You can just ask them like, hey, I know cell phones nowadays are kind of a yes or a no. Are you okay if I communicate with you via text, if I don't see a confirmation from you, or if I don't hear anything from you? And that way you can get the yes or a no right then and there. So that way you don't have to worry about if you're pushing a boundary or not. We normally call people like 3 minutes into if they're not on a call or not. Like based on like whether they're meeting with the AE. We always have our SDRs Slack the account executive, say, let me know if they don't hop on within the first 3 minutes and I will give them a call. We have the SDRs call them because it's their responsibility, it's their meeting. And then they try to get them on about like 3 or 4 minutes after the call started if they don't show up.
Yeah, I think getting the prospect to accept the calendar invite live on the call is a huge pro tip. Huge pro tip. The only other thing I would add, because you two basically checked all of the boxes, or like 6 or 7 really good tactical things in there, is to customize the calendar invite too. So like make the title of the calendar invite, like if I heard an AE self-sourcing initiative around increasing pipeline coverage, I might put increase pipeline coverage to 5x, outbound squad / ZoomInfo intro, and then in the agenda, where Allie, I love that you restate the agenda, because that's what everyone wants to know is, what will I be talking about in this call? And I can't tell you how many salespeople set up calls with literally no agenda in the calendar invite. So the meeting is really easy to cancel. The way that you make it hard to cancel is by putting stuff in there that's like that they mentioned that's important to them right now. Let's do, because we got like maybe 3 or 4 minutes left. Let's do a couple kind of rapid fire Q&A. Okay, someone asked, and this was anonymous, when you have both mobile and office, which would you call first? And do you double tap on either one and then leave a voicemail?
Mobile.
Yeah.
100%. I think with double tapping, I heard this statistic once of like the prospect is 60% more likely to pick up the phone call the second time you call them if you do it back to back. But what I have seen is if you call them right after you call them the first time, it's not as effective. If you wait like 15, 20 seconds and then call them again, I feel like people pick up a lot more if you just wait that little bit of time. But I think double tapping is super important, and mobile phone numbers, yes, 100% of the time.
Yeah. Double tapping is one of those very controversial topics.
I've been double tapped and I always think it's an emergency. And I'm like, but yeah. Because I'm in folks' shoes, I go along with the call as well. I have no decision-making power, but I will,
Yeah.
I will talk to you if you want to.
Do you call people after negative sentiments? So person says, I don't do cold calls. I don't like salespeople. No thanks. Please don't call me again. Outside of the don't call me again, because we're supposed to put those people on a DNC list if they ask us not to call them again. But outside of that, what are our thoughts on calling someone back that didn't respond well when they picked up the phone?
I think if you call them back in like a week, it's probably too soon. Like give it time to breathe. I always tell this to my reps, and it might not be the best thing, but I'm like, you don't know if the person that had the last call with them handled that call well or not. Like, you don't know if they're going to deliver what you're going to talk about as good as you will. They might have completely flopped on that call. You don't know. And then that's why the prospect doesn't want us to talk to them. Right. So if you call, maybe I like 4 weeks afterwards, sometimes depending on the, the call description of the last call, if you have the notes on that, maybe sooner, but I think, 4 weeks is probably a good time frame to follow up again.
Yeah. People usually forget, you know? You can always follow up with an email too. Let's do one more quick one. Okay. So okay, so let me just kind of summarize this question. So basically they're asking, hey, if we're not calling on salespeople or marketers that are customer facing, is it any different for non-customer facing roles? And I work with a lot of companies, by the way, that sell on prospect into non-customer facing, but does the approach change at all?
I don't think, in my opinion, not really. I don't know if Megan, if you would disagree, but you're still speaking to their problems, what they care about. Obviously, you'll have to have research and understanding of who you're calling. I personally like calling folks more that are not in sales or marketing because they don't know what you're doing. Like they're more amenable to chat with you, typically more friendlier. It's just qualitative information on my side, but I prefer it.
I agree 100%. I think it's better. I think as long as you are focusing on your tonality and like I talked about, not being that in your face type of salesperson when you are on the phone. I think we're just people talking to people at the end of the day. And if you keep it in your mind, I am an important person talking to an important person, I think the mutual respect is going to carry through the conversation.
Yeah. Love it. Let's end there. I'll drop into the chat. Go ahead and check out ZoomInfo. Vidyard's got some really good stuff going on. And let's blow up these two on LinkedIn. Go ahead and connect with them. Sorry, guys. Connect with Allie on LinkedIn. Connect with Megan. Connect with me if you want more content and all that kind of stuff. And this is great, you guys. Thanks for coming on, spend some time with us. And everyone else, thank you for all the participation and all that kind of stuff. And we'll send out the recording afterwards.
Thank
cool.
you.
All right, everyone.